Welcome to Civil Discourse, a podcast where participants are free to share their ideas, empathize with other perspectives, and who intend to advance to a better solution to fix a societal ill. We will focus on topics that are particularly complicated. In a time where information is from sources more opinionated than ever, our mission is to find solutions and goals to accelerate the nation's progress with cultural impunity. I'm your host, Todd Furniss. Hello and welcome to today's episode of Civil Discourse hosted by Todd Furniss. I'm Todd Furniss, your host, and as always, hopefully you like the content that you see here, so please like, share, and subscribe. Do all three or do just one of the three. Either way is good with me, but I appreciate your support. I have with me my guest today, J.J. Koch. He's a county commissioner here in Dallas, and for those of you who don't know, the state of Texas is organized such that you have counties in the state. The counties derive their authority from the state, and then you have cities underneath of the counties. So a county is a superset of a city, and there are usually a bunch of cities in a county, and that Dallas is no exception. So what that means is that the power and the authority invested in what's called the County Commissioners Court, comprised of 5 county commissioners, is very significant. They have a lot of responsibility, and that's certainly the case with Commissioner Koch. JJ, thank you so much for coming.
Thanks for
having me. I appreciate your being
again.
here.
Thank you for having me.
And I just want to point out that I am not the guy running for office, and he is, and it's evident because he's got his sleeves rolled up and he's working for the people. So
it's staying busy for sure.
That's right. So you've got a lot going on right now. The court is always busy, and this is no exception. Let's start with some of the issues that you're primarily focused on that are vexing the county or that are emerging as things that require address immediately.
Sure. Certainly there's a lot of economic anxiety, right? So we're facing a great deal of those issues. And kind of as you mentioned, we're an arm of the state. So we do provide a great deal of relief for poverty, whether it be healthcare or provision of certain other types of welfare. We do get involved in that, but we're kind of a pass-through, if you will. Certain things are funded, and we help deliver those services. The things that we have to figure out, particularly now, crime and criminality. That's certainly one of the biggest things that's at the forefront of so many Americans' minds, but certainly everyone that lives in an urban area. Adjacent to that, and certainly related, are the issues regarding mental health and mental illness. I don't think any place in North America, and maybe even the entire world, even in all civilized societies, has it right, has enough care, or has a truly effective care. So we're struggling most right now with the crime piece and the mental illness piece. So
let's unpack that a little bit, because you start with crime and then you talk with mental illness, but you could easily reverse those in order. Let's talk a little bit about something like homelessness in Dallas County. What are you seeing in terms of homelessness expressed in Dallas County?
Sure. We have a point in time count, right? So and typically that takes place during the winter. It's easier to find people in shelters or find people after dark, if you will, someplace where they're known to be. So we'll have another one of those coming up here soon. The last one was fairly shocking. We did see a substantial increase in our homeless population. We have a number of programs that have started largely in partnership with the county and the city of Dallas for temporary housing and permanent housing for those that are involved in the encampments. Now, chicken and the egg type deal, are the encampments attracting more people? Were they homeless elsewhere, and are they kind of coming to a more urban center because they can find a bit of a tribe, if you will, folks that'll help keep them safe instead of being under an underpass by themselves or just by one or two people? Those are some questions that we still have to answer, but we have found some appropriate ways to get people at least further down the road to getting wraparound care, temporary housing, then into permanent housing. But what we have found is that it's not fast enough. I mean, we're still seeing more people kind of join those that are on the streets. And when we get to our next point in time count, I would be surprised if we are not, 10 or 15% greater in our homeless population.
Wow. So that's not a good thing, obviously, and it reflects economic issues, but also likely behavioral issues. I want to make sure that we understand the problem a little bit more fully, though, because one of the terms I've become familiar with recently, and sadly, is housing instability.
Yeah.
So there's another layer of people who are affected by this term in that they have to move from place to place with varying degrees of frequency. They don't know where they're going to spend the night. It's a tragic circumstance, but those are probably not in the numbers you're seeing, right?
Yeah, they're not. So they're not going to be in that point in time count. But I think if you kind of take a step back and look at a continuum, right? So there's housing unstable, and then those that are just most certainly homeless, out of doors for a long period of time. And there's an edge there, right, where the housing unstable people pop into the homeless population. A lot of families, a lot of people that are affected by domestic violence, by drug and alcohol addiction. Typically, in a family unit, one person either you're getting away or the entirety loses everything because of certain behaviors. So if we're looking at the housing unstable piece, right, that is typically more a function of the economy, jobs and affordable housing. Once we kind of get to the line of, where there are other factors at play, we're usually looking at three buckets, right? We're looking at that easier bucket that is at the edge of unstable housing. Again, the instance of domestic violence, those folks that can be stood up on their feet fairly rapidly. It's just a matter of getting them in temporary housing, helping out with some job stability, helping out with childcare stability, and then they're going to be able to stand on their own 2 feet.
But you mentioned there, and not to interrupt, but you mentioned child care. That's a critical component because it's not at all uncommon. In fact, it may be frequent that children are involved.
Yeah.
And so you've got a challenge with the family unit, and particularly a nuclear family unit, which may or may not be the case. But you have to really watch out for children, and then how do they deal with going to school or not going to school, or accessing facilities, et cetera. Right?
Yeah, no, and there's a unique set of problems that pop up with that usually can be entangled, but like so many things, to the individual that's involved in it, you can have a kid that's out of school for a year because of these certain circumstances. They don't want to re-enroll because they think they're going to be, parents think they'll be in trouble. So there are a lot of things to unpack there to get things on the right track. But when it comes to government trying to solve problems, that's the low-hanging fruit, right? These are individuals that can be stood up. So once we get things connected, and that's usually kind of a more quick process to plug someone in. Adjacent to kind of those folks are those that would be in the invisible prison, invisible jail. So recent releases from prison, recent releases from jail, folks that have lost housing, lost their job, but they're willing and able to work, and they don't have drug and alcohol addiction issues. They may have a sex offense, which makes things very difficult for a whole host of reasons, or they may just have a violent felony. They may have an offense related to substance abuse, but they're not addicted. So those folks are kind of another easier bucket because you can get them in housing, you can get them in a program where you can connect them with work, particularly in the environment we have right now, maybe not soon. And that's, just kind of an easier fix. And then you have, the most difficult situations, the mental health and the addiction. And sometimes because of self-medicating, those buckets look more like a Venn diagram rather than separate buckets.
Hold on, don't go too fast.
Sure.
I'm kind of holding on here by the reins, and I'm getting that look like in the 80s with the guy listening to the speakers and his hair's on. So I want to just pause for the moment and let's anchor on the mental health issues just for us. I mean, no, not the mental health, the incarceration component of what you just talked about. So I would say we have historically done a reasonable job of figuring out how to identify those who've committed crimes, try those who've committed crimes, and then where they've been found guilty, putting them into some form of incarceration. I would say historically we have not been good once those people have served their time at exiting incarceration and then reintegrating into society, into community, into family. And there are a whole bunch of reasons for that, some of which are very understandable, but nonetheless don't give those individuals a chance to come back in. So you have you have an issue with housing, right? But you also got to figure out how are they going to find their way? How do they get jobs? Now if you've got a criminal conviction on your record, how do you get past the interview process, or even how do you interview, right? How does someone get in touch with you? So how are we tackling that issue?
Not entirely well, but I do want to go back to a little part there in that system. So there, not so much to challenge it, but something to think about. If you look at certainty of punishment in the United States versus European nations or Japan, for example, right? They typically have shorter sentencing, but a greater certainty of getting caught, right? And I don't think anyone really goes into a situation where there's crime thinking probabilistically, but we have kind of settled on, we are not great at catching all the criminals. But when you are caught, you are convicted, and you typically serve a sentence that may be longer than other sentences for similar offenses in other industrialized nations.
But certain cities are better at catching and prosecuting criminals
Absolutely.
than others. How would you say the cities in Dallas County are doing in that regard?
Good.
Okay.
Not great. And some slip into poor. But I think a lot of that has to do with probably the most important component of policing, and that is, do you actually have a community?
Right.
Do you have a connection with the people that live there? Do the people that live there know the other people around? I mean, there are no amount of cameras that are going to be able to see all the things that look suspicious.
Nor would we want that environment, right?
Nor would we want that
environment. God forbid.
And also, you'd be capturing everything and not transmitting what is relevant. When you have, folks that are alert and they know their neighbors and they know their neighborhood and they know the types of problems that have been going on, and they can act as kind of that front line. That's where things get solved.
And I don't know how it happened. My mom knew everything I did all the time. I have no idea how she had that radar, but she didn't need a camera. Let me put it that way.
I'm sure she got a phone call, right? But and along that vein, though, many of our communities or suburbs do have more tight knit neighborhoods, and those do exist in certain parts of the city of Dallas proper. Where that does not exist, there are, and you can really map those areas, and those are the higher crime areas. Particularly, when you look at Uptown, when you look at Deep Ellum, when you look at places where young people live and they're kind of in and out. They're not there for a long time. They're not necessarily building a ton of relationships around them, unless they're looking for a spouse. There's a loss of stability in that regard.
Is it the role, though, of government to help form community?
I think it's important to encourage it, to encourage, just kind of the social connection, let folks know that, if you know more about your neighborhood, in all likelihood, one, there's going to be mental health aspects to it, and there's going to be, positive aspects of knowing the people around you and having those relationships. But there's, the positive effects for the need for less governing, if you will, the need for less government intervention. Encouraging community as best we can. And if that's a matter of design architecture, we have a plaza here. This is where people meet. This is where people talk. Those are healthy things the government's getting involved in.
So put that differently, you have ways to encourage community ranging from all the way from zoning, right? Where you can encourage certain types of developments and plazas and parks and things of that nature, and all the way to good schools, to support structures, the whole 9 yards. So government can be a facilitator of community, but doesn't necessarily directly drive community.
We can't mandate it. Okay. We can't nor should.
Very good. So, and circling back to the mental health issue, one would argue, I think anyway, that a healthy, strong sense of community anchored in the right values, one would assert, right? Is a fertile ground for good mental health.
It is.
Right?
Yeah. No, and something certainly that I think about and talk about is that we've built a world we're really not meant for. It's faster, it's higher stimulation, but also because of the positive economic displacement, right? We go places for a job. We may not have that family unit with us, when we kind of move out of the nest, if you will. We may not know the people around us terribly well. They may not know our history. And, really the early warning detecting signs, right, usually is around your family. And sometimes, right, there's plenty of situations where someone exhibits signs of somewhat serious mental illness and a loved one or a number of loved ones are willfully blind to it because they don't want to admit to themselves that someone's ill. Sometimes it will be a coach, a teacher, a coworker that notices something, and somehow because of a certain amount of closeness, the positive thing will happen that someone will say, "Hey, listen, it's time to get help," or something has to happen.
Intervene in some way.
Yeah, that happens less and less because we don't have those informal networks, and we do find ourselves, greater separation from our family. And there can be a downside to that. So the expression of mental illness certainly has more opportunities to happen in the first place. You kind of have the genetic predisposition. You have a highly stimulative environment, a highly stressful environment for a lot of folks, particularly if you're in poverty, particularly if you're in certain types of environments where those genetic switches will get flipped, and then worse yet, you don't have the safety net around you to someone to identify it and help you get help calm it down, help just the not necessarily the care piece of it, but just finding ways to reduce stimulation and comfort.
Right. So I want to make sure that this message is delivered in the right way. Your message is being delivered the right way, because on the one hand, I hear you saying this is hard.
Yeah.
This is complicated. But we have a role in government where we can help, and we want to help, and we should be helping. So I don't want to put two words right next to each other that sound potentially horrible together, but I'm hearing that you're a conservative guy who's compassionate.
Yeah, I suppose so. But
I'm not saying that in jest, that what I'm hearing you say is, hey, look, a lot of the traditional approaches we have aren't good or bad, but they, lots of them have demonstrated that they work. But we still, and things like certainty or predictability of a repercussion, a consequence to your actions, that's a pretty traditional idea.
Yeah.
And then at the same time saying, hey, but notwithstanding that, if you make that error, if you make that mistake, then that doesn't mean your life ends. It means you have to suffer the consequence. And then when you re-enter society because you've fully paid off that obligation one way or another, then now it's time for the community to re-embrace you,
right,
in some way or another, in a way that's safe for everybody involved.
Yeah.
Right.
And a lot of that is, certainly the compassion part of it would be, we have just made it easier to fear and reject the other, right? If we were in a small town and someone really screwed up, committed a major offense, went away, right? They were sentenced and came back. They still have family. They still have people that care about them. They'd be there, say they returned and kind of worked to build trust, found themselves in a job, back in a place. You can kind of create that picture in your head of how that person could reintegrate because they're not the other.
Right.
They're the guy that screwed up, right? Well, because of the transitory nature of everything in our society now, it's so much easier to have so many others. It's so much easier to be pretty hard on or easily reject the other. And we easily reject those that come out of prison. And it is to our detriment because, again, we're in that situation where, we don't catch everyone, so we give the long sentences. So we're making it, harder on ourselves, right? If I've put you in jail for 40 years, when perhaps if you had a greater certainty regarding getting caught in the offense, and that would have provided, let's say, the same level of deterrent. But let's say I have you there for a shorter time where I have a better chance to more easily reintegrate you, to release you still in a state that you are as safe as you were. I'll release you at 20 years, I'll release you at 40. You've done your time. Society is safe, but you're still more salvageable, if you will, right? If we had our system tweaked in such a way where there's greater certainty, lower sentence, and greater ability to reintegrate people in society, which would include that, hey, you're learning those valuable skills, but also looking forward to something on the outside, we would be a lot better off.
Yeah. So back on the mental health thing, on the mental health issue, which is really significant. One of the things that we're seeing increasingly is this issue of workplace violence.
Yeah.
I'm privy to some statistics recently that say that about 65-70% of the workplace violence issues are related to mental health issues.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily a big surprise, but it's a flavor of it one way or another. And so if you take this issue and you say, wait a minute, we have this workplace violence issue, I'm already struggling as an employer to keep my workers safe and serve my customers. Really, now you're telling me I got to think about hiring, convicted felons? How do I wrap my head around that?
Yeah, I think that there's probably certain situations where perhaps things are not going to be a great fit, or at least there's going to be a lot more care that needs to be taken to make it work. But there's huge verticals of industry where folks coming out of prison are going to be very willing and able. Anecdotally, I've heard a lot of situations where folks have decided to ban the box and have been very successful.
Ban the box?
Ban the box. You check the box if you've been a felon. So ban the box. That's just kind of the movement regarding not requiring felons to disclose, or if they are disclosing, it's not a disqualifier. And in doing that, they've seen very loyal employees and folks that because perhaps they felt very caged for a time in certain industries. If you're out in construction, if you're doing road work, they're very happy, and they're happy not just upon initial release and getting that job, but rather this is where they want to be for all their free days until they go, because it's just fulfilling given what they've been through in the past.
But they also would have other opportunities. I think if I take the other side of the equation, I'm sitting here thinking, well, we only have a 62.2% participation rate in the U.S. labor force. Well, that's not very good.
Yeah.
And so lots of people would tell you that they're struggling to find capable workers. And there are all sorts of reasons one can disqualify. But at the end of the day, you still got to fill the spot. And if you have a heart for it, in conjunction with a mind for it, then you can take certain precautions to make sure that everybody is safe in that environment, and that an individual can be reintegrated and find a productive life in the community. So I think there's that possibility exists. Let me just ask you this: I always feel like in these conversations, not with you necessarily, but when we're in the media at large, it feels like it's a tiny part of our population we're talking about, and it's the proverbial tail wagging the dog. As a percentage of the population, what are we talking about? Or just in terms of raw numbers, how many people are we talking about who are, say, for example, homeless and housing unstable? How many people do we think we have who are have mental health issues? What percent of the population, or what are the numbers? And then what kind of resources do you think we have relative to a national average of some sorts? And I can help you with the last one, are addressing these problems.
Yeah. The homelessness piece, I want to say that, no greater than 1% of the population, right?
Okay.
And I remember, there was a time when there was these great expectations that, we were going to get it to half and 2%, and that did not happen, right? Building the housing piece, the housing first movement is positive, but it needs to be wraparound services right away. If you are mentally ill, it doesn't matter if I put you in a place. You need, what is most important is getting that care.
Right.
So less than 1% homelessness. Now, those with a felony, I don't know how many are currently incarcerated, because that does fluctuate. But those with a felony offense, I want to say it's as high as 6% of the population. But many of those folks serve probation. So that's why, the majority of folks do not serve time in prison. So I got to kind of go back to the numbers there. So that I'm a little bit fuzzier on, but it is the tail wagging the dog. We are not talking about this is not 20% of the population. If it was, we would be in big trouble. But we still have the largest prison population per capita of any industrialized nation.
I think that's fair to say, but I think what also comes out of that is that the reverberations from the issue of crime are great. It's not just a 1-to-1 ratio, right? It's not 1% affecting 1%. It's that crime affects many, and it affects many beyond those who are directly affected by crime, right?
Yep.
If I get my car jacked, I'm not gonna just say I got my car jacked. I'm gonna go get another car. I'm gonna tell 100 people about the fact that I got carjacked, and then 100 people are gonna tell 100 people, and everybody's gonna be nervous. And now we have an escalated version of societal fear that arises, right? And so there's an element there that we have to be concerned about. And we especially recently we've seen these videos where the Walgreens in San Francisco or the Wawa in Philadelphia, where it's just unbelievable to see what's going on there. So that pervades and proliferates fear into the community. So I don't think it's a 1-to-1, but I do think that we have to unpack this issue as you've nobly attempted to tackle and say, hey, there's more to this story. There's a law and order story to it. There's a mental health story to it. There's a homelessness story to it. But you can't stop there. You got to dig in, right? You got to read past what I like to say, read past the first sentence of the paragraph or past the headline, and really try and unpack the drivers and the consequences and say, okay, now that we understand this problem a little bit better, what tools do we have to solve the problem? And how are we effectively deploying those tools? And I think that's where, I think we really have to look to you to be at the pointy end of the spear, aggregating this information and saying, hey, my recommendation is we go do X.
Yeah. And, really my recommendation is that we, however we can, build the model community. I mean, that sounds very abstract, but we have idealized versions of the small town. We have idealized versions of Japanese communitarianism, where we know everyone, and we're taking care of everyone well. It's going to be difficult to find out what exactly that thing looks like, but we're going to replicate pieces of it when we build something for people that are being reintegrated into society. Right, we are going to build something, more that looks like the model community for those that are suffering from homelessness and, are now getting care for their mental health. They're going to see people. They're going to model their behavior after the family across the way, and they're going to have someone that can see the expression in their face and know, okay, something's wrong. They've been like this for 3 days now. They're not themselves. That just natural organic monitoring that people have done by being social throughout the entirety of our history as a species. So it really, when it comes to the mental health piece, when it comes to reintegrating people into society, it's taking the aspects of what is the best communitarian model community and trying to build as much of that. There's going to be some of it's going to be artificial, manufactured, and some of it may be actual. So, we're gonna struggle with that for a time. But I think there's a part of me that kind of had naturally coming to that conclusion, was very happy in that. Well, this does sound quite conservative, doesn't it? Shouldn't we go back to something that looks traditional? Because those models exist, they are successful. And I don't think we've ever found the new thing that has solved a lot of these problems. I mean, a lot of it is truly a matter of intimate human connections, being able to do the thing they're supposed to do.
So it's interesting. I talked to the former mayor of a Florida town several years ago, and he was highly regarded for having completely turned this town around. And I said to him, I said, what do you think, what did you do to make such great progress in such a short period of time? He said, the first thing I did, I built bike paths that connected all of the neighborhoods from one to another. Mm-hmm. And people would walk and bike, cycle around these paths. Macadam Paths, 8-10 feet wide. Much like we've got the Great Loop and Katy Trail and SOPAC, and we have, a Santa Fe Trail. We've got some great cycling routes now and some good walking paths. The levees on the Trinity. He said, then what we did is we gave every single neighborhood a name. So they have its own identity.
Yep.
And I said, that's interesting. I said, why did you start with bike paths? Because what happens is when you walk from one neighborhood to another, you have empathy for your neighbor's problems.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm hearing you say is a sense of community is a driver for not only self-understanding, right, but also the bigger self-understanding. What are my neighbors all about? My community, my broader community, my family.
Yep.
Now, I'm going to say something that really will completely disavow any idea that I am mentally competent. But what I'm hearing you say sounds almost like it's the basis for a mission statement.
That mission statement is to provide quality service, public safety, and positive behavior change through the use of effective techniques for the betterment of the community.
And you have another statement in there too, don't you, which is your vision statement?
Yeah, the vision statement is to empower, guide, and inspire those we serve.
So a lot of service orientation in there, right?
Very much so, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's pretty simple. And, I sometimes immediately get the initial cringe. Well, wait a second, that's very basic. But I got the same way about my law school's mission statement. And it's Robert Dedman, the Dedman School of Law, leadership starts with learning. And it sounded so Mickey Mouse to me at the time until I read more about President Truman and other folks that's it. Being a leader is about learning. Learning teaches you, one, you don't know everything. You need to be humble, right? Building block of good leadership is being able to get to the right answer and not hold on to the bad answers. But then also being able to dig in and to advance, your people and everyone forward, you need to be covered up with all the ideas. You need to know the path forward. The only way to have that path forward is to be a competent learner. So, in that simple axiom, that sounded Mickey Mouse or sounded like Sesame Street, there's something, very critical there. And I think there's something there with our mission statement. It's just simple. We want this to be a place where you want to live. You're successful at that, where you want to work, and you're successful at that there as well. And, everything else takes care of itself. And I think that's also kind of part of the thinking regarding building community. You set up the right environment for it. You let it happen, and it begins to take care of itself. It is organic. Like all things that work well and are sustainable, it is organic.
As you're looking at Dallas County 2, 3, 4, 5 years out, obviously we've got a big tailwind economically. We have the benefit of things like no state income tax. Although I might have to take you out about the property tax issue. But, big tailwind on no state income tax. One would argue it's a very business-friendly environment in which to own and operate a business. So we have some benefits, but we still got to work on us, right? We still got to get better. What do you see Dallas like in 5 years? Not 10 years, not 100 years, but just 5.
Yeah, I'm hopeful that our partnerships, the county and the cities with our ISDs continue to bear fruit, making sure that we're providing quality education. And of course, that's for 2 reasons, right? Your future workforce, but then also stabilizing and building a bigger middle class. That's just, middle classness is based on its replicability, right? If my kids can't get the education to be a knowledge professional, then they will not be middle class. Right. So, if you are middle class, you want to go to the places where you can make that happen.
I don't know. Have you seen my plumber's bill recently?
Yeah, well, okay. Well, and there is something to that, though, as well. You still have to have a decent underlying education to be good at the pneumatics, even though you may not attend college. So
let me tell you a story about this real quick. So we had some rains a while back and came down and it knocked out our water heater, which is in our basement. And so I called the guy up after rummaging around. I'm completely useless in any of this, right? As my wife would happily tell you. And I said, hey, I need you to come over and take a look at my water heater. So the guys come over and look at the water heater. And I said, hey, I noticed there's this LED panel at the top of my water heater. And I looked up on the web and it says that this water heater is networked. And my plumber said, I don't know anything about that.
Yeah.
But the point was, because my next question was going to be, what kind of alerts did you get back in the operations center?
Yeah.
Which of course their eyes would have spun around. But at the same time, what that means is that there's now this intersection of IT and plumbing.
Yep.
Right. And now you have some back office work with customers, call centers, and in the plumbing industry and HVAC and all this other stuff. So it's really getting murky. I mean, everybody's a knowledge professional.
Yeah.
Right. The guys driving trucks are basically computer engineers, as they're entering all this data into the computers that are on their trucks. It's a lot more complicated than one might think.
Yeah. No, I mean, when you were a competent mechanic, you were great with the physics, right? You understood the tiny explosions that were going on using the fuel. And similarly, you're going to have to know the pneumatics, you're going to know the little explosions, but then also you're going to have to know a little bit about the hardware and software that's going to be monitoring and, what it's keyed for, what are the sensors? Will those sensors go down? How do they fail? Do they fail reliably? Do they fail? Is there redundancy? You're going to learn those things. But yeah, good systems thinking and learning how to learn. So good education, good ISDs are going to be a big part of people's ability to say, okay, my kid's going to be able to either do better than I, or at least, be able to have a lifestyle similar. So yes, next 5 years, we have to continue those partnerships to make sure the schools get a little bit better every year. Are they going to be all the best schools in the nation in 5 years? No, they're not. No, but they're going to be some of the best in the state of Texas. We're going to have more pop into those top 10 because we're doing the right things in those partnerships. A lot of that includes where I have resource that I can share, make sure to do it. Broadband, that's going to be the big piece of it. That we're going to make sure we're going to use our ARP funds to build our own fiber loop for our needs, to scratch our itch. And the federal government has provided the proper incentives for us to do that. Fortunately, there's no incentive or no allowance for us to kind of go out into neighborhoods and hook people up. But we can build the capital, build that fiber loop, and then have someone else operate it and manage it and build off of that with contractual terms. Basically, hey, listen, if I'm going to pay you this sweetheart job to have an easy client like this, you're going to be expected to build so many middle mile off of this. So that'll help both the school
and last mile.
Yeah, and the last mile. So that'll help both the school by either having redundant fiber or first fiber to some of their locations, but then also it'll help the school, the neighborhood school in particular, to get to some of those households there. If they are households that are subsidized by the federal government, those households will have cheap fiber, and you have greater applications in the education world, right? You'll have an opportunity to do some lessons at home and do more lab environment within the school. So changing the planning and curriculum up a little bit so that the kids can get the very best instruction that is available, allowing them to outperform their peers in other states or other parts of the state. So that'll be something that you'll see emerge, I think. And by year 5, you're going to see that solidly within a number of the ISDs, that they're going to be transformed by their leveraging that fiber and the technology and the opportunities that are there. I think, and somewhat similar to that, we probably are going to see greater transplanting of some of the knowledge economy type folks when we get these things right. So great cheap energy here in Texas. We got to keep doing that. It's not just Bitcoin mining that needs cheap energy, right? So if we have good connectivity and cheap energy, there's a lot of, whether it's data services, whether it's, some of the last mile pieces, there's just a lot of modern industry that requires a ton of computation. And if that can be here, that's a very powerful part of the economy. And even when times are economically difficult, people still buy the cheapest price item on Amazon. People still watch the least expensive, they don't take the Hulu package, maybe they take something, cheap off of Netflix, but they're still going to be streaming that stuff at home. They're still going to be consuming in that pathway. They're still going to be on the road, if you will. So if we continue what we do, what we need to do in that piece, we'll build kind of that stronger business network.
So we started talking originally about law and order and healthcare. We bridged into community as a guiding factor talked a little about schools and technology. The only thing left, and we could do 5 podcasts on this, but the only thing left, and I'm maybe stepping into it right now, is roads.
Yeah.
So tell me about roads. I got to get my question on roads in, because roads are not a happy topic.
Yeah. Here's my hope about roads.
We will have some.
We have some. We won't need as many, hopefully. So, I hope that we start sending a lot more aerial, and I hope that we start, planning things better on rail. If we can keep people on parts of roads and stuff, platooned trailers and so forth for last mile stuff in segregated lanes, and as much as we can put in rail, and then some of the last mile stuff, if we can put it in the air with short-term drones, we can start to segment things out and make those roads more efficient and easier to repair. People roads, the vehicles that should be on people roads, smaller, lighter, and damage the road less. The platoon type roads, if they are efficient, if you have efficient platooning with autonomous vehicles, essentially, they are going to drive in such a way that is less damaging to the road, right? So with current road technologies, we'd be able to reduce the cost of all of the highway network as it currently exists. Now, the hope is that we're getting better in a whole bunch of fields of material science. I mean, I'm sure you see things every day where you're like, how does that, it's not just that it changes colors. Like, you see the crazy shirt where people are spraying stuff. Material science is getting better because of the power of computation, the powers of computers. That is taking place also when it comes to roadway replacement. I mean, we were all very excited when we saw the big Chinese deals that were laying down bricks like crazy, and all of a sudden you have this brick road or this brick plaza done in an instant. Well, the machine technology, the materials technology is advancing rapidly, particularly because of places like India and China. They want to have modern infrastructure, and they want to do it. They have to do it at a much lower cost than many countries can afford. That necessity being the mother of invention is going to benefit us, and that we're going to be able to provide better roads for less expensive with some of those material science benefits. So I think that
I'm not seeing that in places I drive anytime soon.
No, I don't think all of that has showed up.
Quite honestly, a lot of this is just in the tertiary roads and secondary roads, not the highways. The highways, by and large, are in pretty good shape.
Yeah, and there is a perverse incentive regarding the funding that goes on with that, right? So if I'm the city of Dallas and I need new sales tax dollars, I want to make sure my highways are great because I need you to come to work every day and eat lunch in my downtown area. And so, all the things that grease the wheels of collecting sales tax, I'm very interested in. I kind of hold you hostage when you live someplace. So your property tax dollars, and you can be real bumpy on your way to get back to your house here in Dallas.